Today I wanted to address this business of when he, in this case he is going to be the spouse with autism spectrum disorder, when he drifts away. And what I mean by that is a lot of times she, the NT wife, will email me or post a comment in some of my Facebook pages, and she will say, well, you know, we were working on things, making a deliberate effort to do so, and things went well for, you know, a couple weeks, and then he stopped doing it. It being, you know, there was actually some conversation, give and take conversation, some emotional reciprocity. He was actually showing some affection and some empathy and providing some, you know, moral support and so forth. Making a good faith effort. He really tried. He wants to make her happy, and he was doing well for a while. And then he starts drifting away. And what I mean by that is some of his connectedness starts to wane. And then she, the NT wife, views that as, oh, we're right back to square one again. This was just a temporary thing. It was just a phase. It wasn't genuine, and we're right back to this business of me feeling like I'm not important anymore. But you know what? Because of the mind blindness and the alexithymia business, and if you have any questions about that, I've got a ton of videos on those two things, he doesn't know he's drifting away. He's not purposely having the thought, oh, this emotional reciprocity is killing me. I've got to go back to my special interest because she's annoying and I just don't want to spend that much time with her. He doesn't have those kinds of thoughts. He doesn't know that the connection is starting to deteriorate. He's out of touch with his emotions. He's out of touch with your emotions. He's not reading your body language, your facial cues. He's not picking up on your comments if you're suggesting that he's slipping. He's going to have to take a direct cue from you, the NT wife, that we're starting to revert back to our old poor relatedness skills. And so you could come up with a phrase or a keyword. You could just say something tactfully like, honey, I think we're slipping. And you can let him know ahead of time what that means. What that means is we were doing well for a while. We were actually having some give and take in conversation. You're actually showing me some empathy, some affection. I could tell that you were trying, and now it seems as though you have stopped trying. That's his cue when you say we're slipping. He knows what that means, and he, in most cases, I have found that he will go, oh, okay, well, thanks for telling me because I didn't know. I wasn't purposely trying to disconnect. I thought we were still connected. So if you find that he is doing well for a time and you actually feel like you're getting somewhere, making some progress, but then it starts to revert back, you're going to have to let him know. He's not doing it intentionally. He doesn't know the subtleties of your feelings. He can't read your feelings. He can't read your mind. You're going to have to let him know in very concrete terms, hey, we're slipping. We were doing well. I want to go back to how we were going and getting along 2 weeks ago. Remember that? 2 weeks ago when things were going pretty good? I'm going to go back to that again. And he will, in most cases, go, okay, yeah, thanks for telling me. Okay? So the moral to this story is, when you're doing well for a time and things start to slip, let him know. We're slipping. Can we go back to, you know, we were doing pretty good a couple weeks ago. Can we go back to that? That would be a big help to him. She is high in social emotional intelligence. You, not so much. You're high in logic. So she is high in social and emotional needs. You, not so much. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. She's just doing the way she's wired. You're doing the way you don't require a whole lot of talk or discussion or exploration about feelings. You're probably not a super social person unless it's work related. So we have this dilemma because you can imagine, because you are more task oriented, more involved with facts, figures, objects, task completion, where she is more of a people person. So you can see why we have this problem. That doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong, but it does cause a problem in the relationship. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So one of the main things that we're trying to accomplish is to, in my book, is to reduce your relationship stress. You, the guys, I want to reduce your relationship stress. How can I do that? Open up the channels of communication, because if she were here, she would say the number one problem is he doesn't provide emotional reciprocity, and we can't talk about things, especially the difficult stuff. He has a meltdown or a shutdown or some variation thereof, and we can never solve the problems. And so the problems pile up, pile up, pile up. They're in the closet this whole time, and they're not going anywhere. They're still in there breathing and growing. In other words, they get worse as time goes on. So if you have something that's 3 years old and then she brings it up again, it's going to be a lot worse than if you'd have dealt with it 3 years ago. Her main complaint might also be he doesn't listen. So sometimes he, and I'm just speaking in generalities here, he is listening or he's pretending like he's listening, but he's not fully hearing everything. And we use the percentage of maybe he only heard 80% of the 80% he heard, maybe didn't quite understand all of that and was afraid to ask for clarification, for fear he'd get his head bit off. So now he's down to 70% of comprehension. And then of the 70% that he understood, he only retained 50% of it. This could be because she provided too much data. You had brain overload and maybe were anxious as she was throwing words at you. And so you didn't retain some of these things. And then of the portion that you did retain, for whatever reason, maybe you didn't implement because maybe you just weren't quite sure what you were supposed to do or supposed to say. Most often, your version of meltdown or shutdown is a result of heightened anxiety. She can and has been abrasive in her approach. She had a good message, but her delivery, it wasn't tailored to a neurodiverse communication style. If she doesn't get this piece, that she's going to have to keep it short and simple and concrete and non-accusatory, then she's going to have to just continue to do it her way, which you then will continue to have anxiety over her message delivery, and the whole thing will just short circuit.
So now we want to look at why an individual isolated problem that could occur later this afternoon may feel so much worse than it actually is. So when there is a relationship problem, we'll just say there's an argument over something that's important to one or perhaps both parties, and there is a heated exchange. Hurtful things are said and done, and it's in some cases just a brutal blowout. In retrospect, when you look back on that argument or that event, there's two memories. There's the content memory and the emotional memory. The content memory is what was said, and the emotional memory is how you felt during that argument. So when you're reflecting on that argument, maybe a week later or even a month later, you have content memory and emotional memory. So every time you remember that fight, we will say, this verbal fight, you also feel the same negative emotions that you felt during that episode. And if you revisit the memory of that argument 2, 3, 4, 12 times, each time you're going to feel just as bad as you did in the moment. And so even though the event only happened once, it feels as though it's happened 12 times because you replayed that video in your head of the event, and each time you play it, each time you remember it, you feel it. And the other reason that a current isolated problem can feel so much worse than it actually is due to this cumulative effect of unresolved problems. If you're like most couples that I work with, you stop talking about problems because your conflict resolution skills as a couple sucked. Not only did you not get the problem solved, you just irritated and frustrated one another even worse than you were before you came into the discussion. So there's this pile of problems that just goes in the closet, and that pile is getting really tall. And so then a problem comes up that, let's say, is a level 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very severe. So relative to some of the other problems, a level 3 problem is not a big deal. But when you throw it on top of an existing pile of problems, now you have the straw that can break the camel's back. So this is why it's imperative to come up with a communication strategy that you can use that doesn't end in a disaster, because you're going to remember the disaster. And each time you recall it, it's going to make it feel worse. And each time you have a problem that goes unresolved, if you guys don't talk about a problem, you don't forget about the problem. It just goes in the filing cabinet called unresolved problems. And when that list gets too long, both parties lose their confidence in their ability to problem solve, which even furthers the likelihood that they won't even attempt it. And now we're in trouble because you have a couple, both of which feel like they're always walking on thin ice. So in summary, the reason that a rather mild problem could feel like a super bad problem is due to the emotional memory factor and the cumulative effect of unresolved problems factor. It's not uncommon for me to get concerns from NT wives when they say, I try to talk to my husband about difficult things in the relationship,
and there's things that are not going right, and I would really like to work on them and try to fix them, but we never broach the topic because he just has some version of a meltdown or a shutdown, or he hurries up and agrees with me just to get me to shut up, and he never follows through with anything. So if you find that when you try to bring up important issues with him, and you can never get anywhere, never get anything resolved because he either engages in some version of a shutdown or a meltdown, oftentimes, at least what I find oftentimes happens, is has to do with tone of voice or inflection. When you're upset, even though you may not necessarily know you're upset, you may think you're calm, but the attitude that you bring into the conversation changes your tone of voice just slightly. So what I find most often is that the NT's tone of voice changes even though she might be trying to remain calm when approaching her husband about a difficult topic. But you know what? Unless you're a very, very good actor, your attitude will kind of leak out in your tone. In other words, the inflection will seem to be a bit off to him. So a major source of sensory overload for the person with ASD is voice, especially tone of voice. He often analyzes voice tone first and then decodes the words used by you later. So any voice inflection by you that remotely conveys a negative attitude, for example, sarcasm, irritation, criticism, and so on, is going to be detected and taken personally. So a negative tone can be offensive to your ASD husband, especially if he has low self-esteem and is hypersensitive to criticism anyway. But he's really going to be offended if he's not sure why you are using a particular inflection. He's going to be thinking, is she upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Why does she sound mad? And so then there's this loop effect that occurs in his thinking process. In other words, he mulls over the comment made by you long after the conversation has ended. You may have noticed that if he downloaded your comments as criticism and did some version of a meltdown, sometimes he may not talk to you again for days. I've had reports where she has said something that offended him and he gave her the silent treatment for a week. So anxiety and agitation will increase as he tries to analyze the motives of the speaker, in this case you. So what we're really referring to here is your spouse's obsessive way of thinking. In fact, it might be said that one of the most troublesome traits of ASD is the tendency towards repetitive thoughts, and we call those ruminations. So while the ability to have extreme focus, which your ASD husband probably can do very well, while that can be a strong point, it's a problem when he can't shift away from thinking about things that are not of his choosing. So often the person on the spectrum gets caught up in worries, he dwells on past slights from his NT spouse, he ponders his own mistakes, and simply has problems letting go of past hurts. And even though the incident in question, maybe you tried to broach a difficult topic with him and it ended badly, that was just one incident, but every time he recalls that incident, which was ruminations again, even though the incident happened once, it feels to him as if it's happened 10, 12, 15, 25 times. So I hope that answers the question of why it's difficult to broach hard topics with him, because he may even download neutral comments from you as criticism. So the moral to the story here is we have to come up with a communication strategy that takes into account his tendency to pay more attention to your tone of voice, especially if there's some slight annoyance or anger in there. We need to come up with a method where you're paying attention to your tone of voice so that he doesn't pick up on that and hyper-focus on that.
Does your neurotypical partner suspect that you have an autism spectrum disorder? And do you feel that she blames you for most of the relationship problems due to this disorder? Well, if that is the case, then here is kind of an informal quiz to see if you might want to pursue a formal diagnosis. If you answer yes to most of these questions, then your spouse may be right. So, here we go. You either have the following traits or you have been accused of having them. Ready? Conflict resolution seems impossible. According to her, I am very insensitive, uncaring, and selfish. Anxiety is a common state for me to be in. Being in this relationship seems very difficult and complicated. Even if we are physically together, there is an emotional distance that leaves my wife feeling alone. Even though I like having a companion, it does create stress for me. Her expectations keep changing. Her feelings are all over the map and change from minute to minute. I am easily stressed by some social situations. I am mostly interested in my special activity rather than spending quality time with my wife. I can be self-absorbed. I can get defensive easily. I demonstrate my feelings of love through my actions rather than words or physical affection. I don't exactly know what she expects of me. I don't fully understand the nature of give and take in conversations. I don't like making commitments to other people. I don't like pressure or expectations put on me. I feel anxious when unpredictable situations occur or when things change. I find it difficult to empathize. I find it impossible to sense what my wife is feeling. I have difficulty talking about my emotions. I have had a hard time holding on to a job. I have trouble making the connection between what she is feeling and what I have done or not done to hurt her. I like talking about my special interests a lot. I need long periods of solitude and quiet time. I need structure and routine. I often cut her off and change the subject when she is in mid-sentence. I often deny there is a problem with our relationship. I often fail to follow through with what I have agreed to do. I often worry that I'm not capable of being a good husband. I did put some effort into winning her in the early going of the relationship, but now I don't put much effort in keeping her. I sometimes suffer from sensory overload. I tend to stay in my rational mind most of the time. I usually don't like to socialize. I usually have trouble talking with my wife about emotional issues. I'm more comfortable with old friends than new ones. I've had significant relationship problems long before I met my wife. Making compromises is difficult for me. My best efforts in the relationship still don't please her. My wife believes that she has made more adjustments to me over the years than I have to her. My wife claims she is depressed and emotionally damaged due to our relationship. My wife complains that she feels like she has to mother me. Our relationship was passionate in the beginning, but the passion has dwindled over the years down to virtually nothing. Our sex life has stalled. She always tries to change me. She claims that I'm lazy and don't contribute enough, for example, with chores. She has said I am narcissistic. She is a very complicated and difficult person. She's usually disappointed whenever her birthday or anniversary occurs. She is very needy and clingy. She often says she's not important to me. Sometimes even neutral conversations with my wife can seem like an attack or criticism. This relationship is often messy. When she wants to talk about our problems, I immediately get worried that it's going to turn into another fight. And when we argue, I tend to view my wife as very illogical, overly emotional, and even neurotic. So if you answered yes to most of those, then you don't necessarily know if you have the disorder, but you certainly know you have enough of the traits to cause relationship difficulties. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link,
It'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you. Hey guys, this is Mark. Click on the join button underneath any of my videos, then click on members only videos, and then click on join. And for $9.99 a month, you'll have access to members only videos, which are excerpts from previous workshops I've conducted for NT partners, ASD partners, and the neurodiverse couple. New videos will be uploaded weekly.